Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk about Kelsey Dionne. We're going to talk about Shadowdark, and we're going to talk about Shadowdark sweeping the Ennies. All right, let's jump into this. I got a lot to say on this. All right, so first of all, I just had some back and forth with Kelsey Dionne on in the comments on another channel, which is interesting. And also you will find content right here if you just Google Scott Garibay, Kelsey Dionne, Shadowdark. Some of my videos will come up. I've discussed her pretty extensively previously, and when I discussed her was when she, defeated every OSR creator in the world and created a $1.3 million OSR Kickstarter. There had never been I don't think there had ever been $1 million OSR project before that, right? So, and why was that special? Well, let's talk about it, right? So I think, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong here, the story was good game, good creator, surprise, the creator's a woman. Now, why would that be a big deal? Well, Dungeons and Dragons has an issue. It has never, in 5 decades, Dungeons and Dragons has never had a female design lead, a woman design lead, okay? Now, I've discussed that a lot on this channel. You will find many videos on this channel on that subject, okay? So basically, Dungeons and Dragons has an issue with woman design leads, right? It has a very stark lack of them. So stark that it is a talking point and has been a talking point for years. It is a shocking lacuna in their progressiveness, right? Because Dungeons and Dragons does present as progressive, right? But that's super non-progressive, right? It's super non-progressive. And honestly, if you look at the history of Dungeons and Dragons design leads, it is shockingly non-progressive. It's all white. It's all middle-aged white males, all of them, literally all of them, right? Like, that's a problem. That's a major problem, right? And I actually have a list of them. Like, and if you think any of this is wrong, please correct me. But I don't think I'm wrong on this. Okay. So now let's get this. The OSR is even worse, right? What is the OSR? Old school rules, old school Renaissance. Pick your choice. Who's interested in the OSR? A bunch of grognards. The word literally means old complainer, and OSR is famous for attracting grognards. Grognards are very rarely women, right? Just because there aren't enough women in Dungeons and Dragons. And at the time when you would grow a grognard in the 80s and 90s, there were even fewer of them playing, right? So the fact that a woman designer comes in and defeats every single OSR creator who has ever picked up a pen, right, and smashes the record, right, and has a $1.3 million Kickstarter is huge. So it was huge that an OSR game that people were excited about came out. That was a big deal. It happened. Shadowdark legitimately drew a ton of attention and a ton of excitement to the OSR, right? But and then there was this, and then there was people say, wait a second, this is very unusual. This is a woman designer on an OSR product, which is not that common. Now, if you want to tell me I'm wrong and you want to, throw me some examples, I'm more than willing to listen. Please, come at me in the comments. All right. Okay. So all this happens, right? So she shatters the record and gets 1.3 million on Kickstarter. Shadowdark, and she completes the Kickstarter. It comes out on time. Everybody's happy. That's a big deal too, right? Not because she's a woman, but a lot of Kickstarters. Gareth Skarka just delivered his Kickstarter after 12 years, right? Far West. Like that, so the fact that she delivered on time and everybody was happy, that's a big deal. Chaosium, I think had some trouble with Kickstarters a little while back, or maybe they helped somebody with it, but yeah, but there are a lot of problems. You see a lot of problems on Kickstarter. The fact that hers went as smooth as glass was a big deal, right? So, all right. So all this happens, right? Now, I'm a fan of Kelsey Dionne. And the reason why I like Kelsey Dionne is not Shadowdark. She actually worked with Runehammer Games, and that's Index Card RPG. And I believe she worked directly on Blood and Snow. That is phenomenal. And you will find videos on this channel about that, right? She is And also I'm a fan of Arcane Library, which is her company, right? So I'm a fan of her. I like her, right? Now, all that said, I have had some harsh words for Shadowdark, and the reason why is the OSR community picked that thing up and ran, and I don't like OSR overall, right? So I am a fan of Kelsey Dionne, and I recognize these two massive accomplishments: $1.3 million Kickstarter, 3 massive accomplishments. Delivering on the Kickstarter, collecting money is not that big a deal. Delivering on what you promised, that's a big deal, right? And then finally sweeping the Ennies, okay, at Gen Con. All right, 3 huge accomplishments, right? So why are we talking today? Well, let's get all the way there. All right. So first of all, are these legitimate wins? First of all, are the Ennies legitimate awards? That's a good question, right? So here's my take on that, right? I am concerned. It is my belief that the Ennies are exactly like the Oscars, okay? That the Oscars only award art house films, and Oscars absolutely refuse to take serious any genre pick, right? They routinely ignore sci-fi, fantasy, comic book movies, Lord of the Rings movies. If it's got a dragon in it or a laser gun in it, the Oscars are not going to be fair to that movie. It's known. It is openly discussed, right? It is my opinion that the Ennies are to Hasbro Dungeons and Dragons as the Oscars are to blockbuster films. They simply ignore them, right? And so the reality is, like, okay, so like Game of the Year, right? Like, or actually, they have given awards to Shadowdark, right? And they're like Game of the Year, and here's some other awards. And I want to make it clear, the only headline I saw was Kelsey Dionne sweeps the Ennies, right? I didn't even look at what it won, right? And the reason why is I already knew this was going to happen. I knew this was a lock, right? And the reason why is woman OSR designer delivers smash hit, right? Like, that writes itself, right? And the Oscars are the same. The Oscars want a movie that has a narrative. Shadowdark has a narrative. OSR woman defeats every OSR man. That's the narrative, right? Like, that is compelling, right? That is a compelling story that goes along with the game, right? And I do believe that the Ennies are exactly like the Oscar. They want a story, right, with the winner, right? And so I do believe personally that one of the reasons why Kelsey Dionne was able to sweep the Ennies is I don't think Hasbro's products are ever considered. Now, why would that be? Well, the reality is I think it would be extremely boring to go to the Ennies if Hasbro was considered. And the reason why is every book they have would sweep the Ennies every year, right? Now, why is that? Let me count it down for you. First of all, Shadowdark's art, according to someone who told me in my comment section, is built by a professor who does death metal album covers, right? You know who does D&D's art? Literally the best fantasy artists in the world. The art is so good, it is often confused, wrongfully confused for art that could only be created by a computer. Or like, it is astonishingly good. The art that comes out of for Dungeons & Dragons comes out of the biggest fantasy art machine that has ever been built by humans, which is Magic the Gathering, right? They have thousands of fantasy artists. They pick from the best, right? The idea that any company in the world competes with Dungeons & Dragons art is ludicrous. And in my opinion, it's ludicrous. It's absurdly ridiculous. Tyler Jacobson could draw circles around this, professor, right? And not an art professor. This professor, right? And he might be an art professor. This professor who draws death metal cover band and for black and white art. The idea that black and white retro clone D&D art, right, is better than the material that came out in 4 canon books last year is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. And I believe it's the same for layout and writing, right? The idea that a tiny little company like Arcane Library outperformed a company that's at scale, where people put on their pants in the morning, drink their coffee, drive to work, and get another cup of coffee at work, and go to work every day on the product with teams of dozens of people. D&D's production, D&D's art team is bigger than the entire Arcane Library crew, and not by a small amount, like a lot, right? And so the reality is, the idea that this game was written better, laid out better, had better art, right, and is a better game than Dungeons & Dragons is absolutely ludicrous to me. So from that perspective, now, this is not Kelsey Dionne's fault, and she didn't create this problem. This problem has been going on for 15 years, as long as the Ennies have been around. I feel like they have purposely ignored the material for Dungeons & Dragons. And the reason why is it would sweep every category every year, right? Like, because they're at scale. They pay millions of dollars to create Dungeons & Dragons, right? Every other company that would be competing, literally the art team is larger than most of D&D, is larger than most other companies, and not by a smaller margin, by 2 or 3 times, right? So the reality is, Arcane Library created a great OSR game, right? But the idea that this black and white D&D retro clone is better than the material that's been put out this year by Dungeons & Dragons, for Dungeons & Dragons, seems ludicrous to me, right? So I am, now, again, this is not Kelsey Dionne's problem. She did not create this issue, right? That the Ennies ignore D&D. But it is my humble opinion that the Ennies specifically, arbitrarily ignore all Hasbro D&D products so that they can have a competition, because if they didn't, there would be no competition, right? This is similar, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I have heard that, like, the New York Times, right? There was a point where they, like, the Harry Potter books, decades after their release, outsell the vast majority of YA books, right? So if they were for realsies and did the list, it would just be Harry Potter every week, right? But because they thought that was boring, they switched the list, right? And so I strongly believe the reason we're seeing this Kelsey Dionne issue is because Hasbro D&D products are not taken seriously, right? In my humble opinion. Now, I want to give her flowers, right? She has done the impossible, right? She has defeated Dungeons & Dragons this year, and she's won the awards that it failed to win, right? Done and done, right? That is huge. And that is particularly huge for a woman to do that in the OSR. And if you're like, oh, Scott, it doesn't matter that she's a woman, we're not there. We are not there. In a world where Dungeons & Dragons has literally never had a design lead, you cannot ignore the fact that Kelsey Dionne is a woman who just defeated every OSR man designer and did 3 things they didn't, right? Deliver a $1.3 million Kickstarter, deliver the game that excited the entire OSR community. Not a single male designer did that this year. Not a single male designer did that this year. Not one. And none of them swept the Ennies, right? Like, so she is the OSR king and queen, right? She is both, right? She is king of the OSR. So she did do that. I do feel that the problem is not with Kelsey Dionne. I want to be super clear about this. The problem is with the Ennies. And I honestly believe the Ennies need to be honest and start giving actual attention and the ability for the Hasbro D&D products to win, which right now, I don't think they're being fairly considered, in my humble opinion. That is simply my humble opinion, right? Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider like, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.